Let's start by laying out some of the background for why understanding consumers is especially important in light of recent events. The COVID-19 pandemic is unlike anything we've experienced in recent memory. It's causing massive devastation to individuals' lives, health, and economic well-being. In terms of lost jobs worldwide, as of this year, the International Labor Organization estimates that working hours will have declined between 1.3 and 4.6% globally, which equates to between 36 million and 130 million FTE jobs. Furthermore, the ILO expects the impact and recovery from the pandemic to be uneven across countries, sectors, and parts of the workforce. Job destruction has disproportionately affected low-paid and low-skilled jobs and sectors such as accommodation, food services, arts and culture, retail, and construction. Consumers are emerging from lockdowns and self-quarantine, with many opting to increase the amount of time that they're working from home. The impact on consumers' lives has been profound, and the impacts cut across all types of geographies and demographics. No one is really untouched, directly or indirectly, by COVID-19. We've experienced massive disruptions to our work, home, and social lives, economic and financial stability, health concerns for family and friends. We've seen hoarding and supply chain disruptions for products we take for granted, increased vigilance for public and personal health. We've also seen some very positive responses from humankind: creativity, support for one another, and recognition of the everyday heroes all around us. Disruptions and change have accelerated across all facets of society. Social movements, counter movements, stimulus expenditures, political intervention, and stagnation, and new regulatory landscapes. We can imagine that all these external forces that we see on the outside of this semicircle inevitably impact what happens internally within our organizations. In this short course, our focus is on understanding changes in consumer behavior. We've chosen to focus on consumer behavior because it is the most critical aspect to understand in the new normal. The tools that we discuss today will help organizations gain greater understanding of the challenges for consumers, and in turn, the challenges that organizations face in serving those consumers while meeting new needs and desires. In a way, understanding the shift in consumer behavior is our new challenge. We often use this quote from Albert Einstein to encapsulate the value of such problem framing. If I had 60 minutes to solve a problem and my life depended on it, I'd spend 55 minutes defining the problem and then 5 minutes solving it. The desirability, feasibility, and viability, or DVF framework, was originated by IDEO and is widely used to help us understand the aspects or conditions for innovation. The feasibility aspect is largely a technical or operational question that asks whether our company can make or deliver the offering. Desirability is focused on understanding whether customers want the offering. Lastly, the viability aspect asks whether the offering will be profitable for the organization. The remaining hypothesis is that successful offerings must be able to answer yes to all three questions. Here are a few examples of mistakes companies may make as they develop new products. The first is probably the most common mistake. Here, someone has built an app that certainly is easy to create, is affordable, but it's likely that no one will want or need this app. So here we fail the desirability test. The second is an example that's probably less common in the private sector, but illustrates a product that is feasible to produce, desirable for consumers, but the price point will not support the business model. Lastly, a more outlandish example of an offering that certainly would be desirable at a variety of price points, but with the current technology is simply not possible. Typically, companies start innovating using the resources and capabilities that they already have. This is often called the tech push approach. While in some cases this can work, it is not likely to be a sustainable approach to innovation, especially for anything disruptive. Let's see a dramatization of a tech push approach gone wrong.
Hey, I've got a great idea for a business.
That's exciting. Tell me about it.
I've developed a chemical isomer that links to volatile organic compounds, causing carbon bonds to rupture, and wraps them in a nanotube coating.
Huh. That's a little confusing. Can you dumb it down for me?
Sure. What I do is I take a proprietary isomer that I developed with a picric acid wash that hollows out the carbon bonds and replaces them with a nanotube wrapping.
Okay, so I guess it's pretty technical.
Oh yeah. I've been working on this isomer for 9 years.
So what's the business idea?
To sell it,
To who?
everybody will want one,
What for?
so they can wrap their volatile organic compounds in carbon nanotubes.
I think you might need a target customer. I don't think I need to wrap my compounds in your nanotube.
Well, maybe not you.
So, for people who buy it, what's the value you are providing them?
I've developed a chemical isomer that links to volatile organic compounds causing carbon bonds to rupture and wraps them in a nanotube coating.
You've said that already. This is getting annoying. Why should anyone care about your isomer?
I spent 9 years on this.
I know that. Okay, pretend I'm an investor. How can I make money off your product?
By selling it.
You're a smart guy, but try not to think like a scientist. Think like a business person.
Okay. Value chain. Term sheet.
I have to go now and answer that.
That's not your phone.
I know.
So while this is a skit intended to be funny, as innovation advisors, we see some form of this all too often. Inventors are often very strong in their industry and technical knowledge, but can forget about the people that might be interested in buying their invention. To see a real life example, some of you may remember Juicero, the Wi-Fi enabled premium juice subscription service. Juicero was developed by a serial entrepreneur in Silicon Valley, playing into the health and connected devices trends, and raised a lot of money to develop a juicer. After 2 years, they had brought in a former Coca-Cola CEO and launched a product into the market. The Juicero had a lot of features. It was connected to the internet, had a QR code scanner, used a lot of force to press juice, and was made from highly durable materials. The business model was to sell a subscription and make money on the juice packets. However, the juicer would not work under a variety of conditions. If the juice pack was expired, the QR code would not let the juicer run. If you ran out of juice packs, the Juicero cannot make juice from fruits and vegetables. And if you were disconnected from the internet, also no juice. As you can imagine, it received a lot of controversy at the time and closed down shortly afterward. Juicero's core problem was that it wasn't solving a customer need. Case in point, Bloomberg put out a video showing you could simply squeeze the juice packs by hand. So people were paying a lot just to have something squeeze a pack of juice. Then came the social media backlash, and from there was no coming back. When we look back at our DVF framework, we can see why starting with the technical feasibility can end up fruitless. The design thinking approach suggests we start iterating here with the customer's desire. So, what is design thinking? We believe it is a key ingredient to successful and sustainable innovation. In the rest of this video, we'll get into the mindset, processes, and tools that make up design thinking. While there are many definitions of design thinking, we define it as the discipline of developing solutions in the service of people. So let's break this down. We chose the word discipline because design thinking is a branch of knowledge and something to learn or practice. This is highlighted in a quote from Dr. Heather Fraser. Design is not a one-shot vaccine. It's an innovation fitness program that puts an organization on top of its game. It is not an event. It is a way of thinking, communicating, and doing every day. Secondly, developing solutions. Design thinking is not a discipline limited to designers of products. Design thinking can be applied to any problem related to people. It is an approach to developing solutions. We may not consider ourselves designers, but really we are constantly designing solutions in our personal and professional lives. The quote from Nobel laureate Herb Simon expands on this idea. Everyone designs who devises courses of action aimed at changing existing situations into preferred ones. And lastly, at the center of any given design thinking project is a person or group of people. People are the source of inspiration for design thinking solutions. We originally talked about the discipline design thinking. This starts with maintaining a human centered mindset. Designers must consistently be curious about and empathetic towards the customer. Core questions include: what does the customer need? What problem does the customer have? And what jobs does the product need to do? The human centered design mindset manifests as a set of behaviors. These include bias toward action over analysis, radical collaboration with diverse stakeholders, a culture of prototyping, or an iterative approach to defining, making, and refining. Show don't tell. Showing is a more immersive form of communication and elicits better feedback versus simply talking about an idea. And lastly, mindful of process. As we'll discuss shortly, design thinking has been formalized into a process. There are many ways we illustrate the design thinking process, but the core principles you'll see across the stages are about learning, building, and testing. Also, most depictions of the process emphasize the iterative nature of human-centered design. As an example of one of the design thinking processes, we can see our process begins on the left with a general problem statement. We first diverge by performing research and getting a deep and empathetic understanding of the user. We then evaluate the data we've collected to converge onto specific insights that may point us to specific problems. There is iteration between these first two steps. Once a specific problem is chosen, we can once again diverge by ideating on potential solutions. Lastly, using various prioritization criteria, we can determine specific solution prototypes to test with users. While the process illustrations convey a sense of orderliness, the human-centered design process can often feel like this. A lot of confusion and dog legs in the beginning, but a convergence towards clarity later on. Lastly, human-centered design requires the use of a specific set of tools. All across the process, we are using tools that help us uncover user needs, generate solution ideas, prioritize desirable features, etc. Later on, we'll be talking about a few of the many tools commonly used in human-centered design. In summary, human-centered design is comprised of a mindset, a process, and a set of tools. And the first step of the design process is about finding problems worth solving. And to do this, we again focus on understanding our customers. There are a plethora of tools designers can use in order to further understand their customers. This is a short list of tools, of which there are many more to explore. Each tool provides a different type of insight and comes with their own set of advantages and disadvantages. For example, end user interviews can allow designers to capture customers' thoughts, reactions, feelings as they are being communicated and to follow divergent streams of inquiry. On the other hand, a journaling exercise may allow customers more reflective time or ability to record minutiae of some task or thought with perhaps less enumerator bias. Today, I'll be talking about three different tools: what they are, what they look like, and some associated best practices. The first tool we'll talk about is stakeholder mapping. Stakeholder mapping is a way of visualizing the network of people who have a stake in a given system. It helps orient designers to the lay of the land of the people that may be involved in the problem and the solution. In this example, a team was designing new services for people living with chronic diseases. They drafted a full diagram, then decided to focus on diabetic working professionals. You can see how each stakeholder is labeled, the interactions between the stakeholders is defined, and the pain points or desires of key stakeholders is captured in the word bubbles. Here's the full stakeholder map from the previous slide. You can see that the design team was considering different types of receivers of diabetes care by looking at the top row of stakeholders. Once they focused on professionals, the team made linkages to all the other individuals that the professional must interact with in order to manage their care. Typical of these types of maps, the stakeholders are clustered for organizational purposes. Here's another example. This map shows us that the scope of a stakeholder map is not limited to a single system. This stakeholder map is centered around health solutions for pregnant women, but the scope of the map extends out to government entities and healthcare product manufacturers. And what does the creation process look like? Here's an example of a team working on a map. What do you notice about this picture? A few observations about what they're doing. They're drawing people, not objects. They're using labels for the people, as well as describing each person's primary motivation as indicated by the speech bubbles, and using the arrows to convey directionality of the interactions. Also note how they are working. It looks like our team has created a list of potential stakeholders on the stand on the right of the screen. Once they were all aligned, they were able to work simultaneously on their own portions of the map in parallel. Great. So this is an example of what a stakeholder map might look like at the beginning of the exercise. This is an example map after about an hour of work. Can you guess what this stakeholder map is about? What other types of things do you notice? A few observations on how they used visual cues to add information to the map. You'll notice some people are bigger than others, which in this case indicates importance. Again, there are logical groupings, kitchen, floor, and some people going in between. Again, we have this speech bubbles and arrows. In this one, we have the use of color to denote employees versus non-employees. A few have been marked with a red star. These are the key decision makers. And one figure has a dotted outline you'll see in the lower left corner. This was a way for the team to note a potential stakeholder they believe may exist, but needed to gather further data to confirm. So here's that same stakeholder map after the team had some time to do additional research and give it a bit more visual richness. You'll notice that the customers have turned from a man and woman to a family with a child. People are grouped a bit differently and some color coding has been applied. Oftentimes, a team will treat the stakeholder map as a living document throughout the course of a project, updating it as they learn more. Teams should determine on their own the right level of fidelity they need on a project by project basis. For example, some projects just need a quick sketch to ensure everyone is aligned, while other projects may want to have an artifact that lives over time and can be used as an onboarding or training document as new team members join the project. In summary, this is a quick guide on how to get started with stakeholder mapping. Remember that the purpose of stakeholder mapping is to understand and communicate the world of our user through the connections and interactions of those around him or her. While I won't go through each of these steps, feel free to screenshot this slide for future reference. Stakeholder mapping first requires an identification of the scope and subject area to focus on. Then we assemble a diverse team to build the map. The map should have the requisite scope and level of detail to communicate our objectives. And some helpful hints as you get started. The first and most important step of a successful stakeholder map, as with any project, is to clearly determine the objectives. What do you want to learn? What do you want to communicate? A clear set of objectives should help you determine the scope or boundaries of the stakeholder map. As you proceed with the map, you may find that the scope will change. This is normal, but you should validate any scope changes with your objectives. Lastly, stakeholder maps, as we've noted, are both a thought processing tool as well as a communication tool, meaning the maps provide a structured approach to understanding users while also creating a visual communication piece to convey that understanding. The level of detail you include in the final stakeholder map should be determined by what you want to communicate in order to reduce any unnecessary clutter. The second tool we'll be talking about is end user interviews. We will use a broad definition of end user interviews, a way of learning about customers through direct conversation. While many of us are familiar with interviewing, The goals and plans for end user interviews are worth remembering. As with all of our tools today, the goal with interviews are to empathize, observe, and capture. We want to observe, look for real life situations and conditions. If you are invited to the end user's home, for example, what context clues can you generate to help better understand the person's living situation? Second, we want to empathize, understand their reality and what drives decisions. Empathy isn't necessarily just about emotional perspective. It includes empathizing with all of the factors that impact a person's decision calculus, their passions, energy level, feelings, understanding, interpersonal dynamics, etc. Lastly, we want to capture as much of this information as we can by using words and actions to illustrate their reality. Tactically, we can do a few things that will help set ourselves up for success. Again, be clear on your objectives for the interview and convey them to the interviewee when appropriate. Secondly, determine who will have the right experience, knowledge, or situation and how you might reach these people. Lastly, set yourself up with a discussion guide. Discussions are meant to be fluid and follow inquiry as it presents itself. This is what differentiates it from a questionnaire. All right, now that we've covered some of the basics, let's see some of it in action. Here are a few clips from Lean Startup on first a wrong way and then a right way of doing user interviews. As you're watching, jot down a few notes on what you notice about what's good and what's bad from each example.
So one of the traps of customer development is getting out of the building, assuming you understand the problem. And that's bad in general, but it gets a lot worse when you assume you understand the problem and you're talking to people who actually do have the problem, and you end up sounding like an idiot. So let's see an example of that.
Thanks for meeting with me today. So I know that you're looking for toys that you can spend more time with your daughter playing, and we've designed this great toy that lets you do that. You can play with her and have fun, and you can teach her about building and circuits. So what do you think?
Well, actually, that's not the kind of toy I'm looking for. I like toys that she can play with by herself because I'm pretty busy. I don't want to be showing her how to do every single step along the way. I have other things that I need to do.
Oh. Thanks for meeting with me today. So I just wanted to kind of understand a little more about your needs and with your daughter and the toys that she plays with. So I was wondering how you and your daughter play with toys together.
Well, we don't actually play with toys together that often. So on a typical day, I come home from work,
I'm
she'll
doing
do
a lot
the
of other
homework.
things.
I'm not always doing every single activity with her.
Can you walk me through the last time you bought a toy for your daughter?
Yes, so I heard about a toy.
Can you tell me about the last time you bought a toy for your daughter's friend's birthday party?
Well, actually, I buy all the toys for birthday parties.
Can you tell me what you and your daughter do after school when she gets home?
So my daughter does homework at the kitchen table.
Can you tell me about how your daughter plays with her toys?
Well, I can tell you about one specific toy, and that's American Girl. She's obsessed with the catalog, and she reads all the...
So what did you notice about the quote wrong way of interviewing? A few observations. The interviewer led with their interpretation of the problem and a predefined solution. The question, what do you think, is open-ended, but it's still only referring to the predefined solution. And lastly, the interviewer shows disappointment in her face from the interviewee's response. This signals in a not so subtle way that they are looking for a particular response from the interviewee. Instead, in the right way, you'll notice that the questions are all open-ended and invite the interviewee to tell stories, a very comfortable way of communicating for most. In doing so, the data you collect won't necessarily fit into nice, neat buckets, but instead, you'll capture the richness of the user's experience to later perform some analysis. At the end of the day, end user interviews are conversations with people, and the deeper the connection you are able to build, the deeper the insight you'll be able to unlock. Here's another set of short videos from Lean Startup that demonstrate the value of building empathy for the customer and how not to do it.
Unless you're a domain expert, getting close to the customer and becoming the customer is sometimes really hard. Sometimes it requires you to spend weeks in a library reading up on computational fluid dynamics or computational chemistry. Sometimes it even requires you to have a co-founder in that space. But sometimes it takes you to do some extraordinary efforts to have empathy for your potential customers. And here's a great example of empathy for customers.
Karina, thank you for having me today. I'm really excited to share our new glucose monitoring app with you. It helps diabetics measure their blood sugar. You're a diabetic, right?
Right, yeah, I'm a diabetic.
So this should be an app that I imagine you'll love it. It's really going to help you on a daily basis, I'm sure.
I have diabetes, but what do you really know about diabetes? I mean, I've had this disease my whole life.
I've read a lot of research on diabetes. This is an app that should really help you.
You know, I have to stick myself 7 to 10 times a day to measure my glucose levels. You know that I get calluses on my fingers from that?
I don't know all the details actually of what it's like to be a diabetic.
You don't have a clue about what my life is like.
Karina, thank you again for letting me come and talk to you about the app we're developing. So it's an app specifically for diabetics to help you monitor your blood glucose levels.
What do you really know about diabetes?
So I admit, as a non-diabetic, I can't know exactly what it's like to be diabetic, but in order to build an app that could really help diabetics, I've spent the last month living like I was diabetic. So I've pricked my finger and checked my blood before every meal and mornings and nights, just so I could understand what a diabetic went through.
What? Really? You've been pricking yourself?
Yeah, I mean, you probably know this better than anybody, but now I have calluses across all of my fingers and I'm having to use new fingers all the time just to be able to get blood out. I mean, at the end of the day, how can we build an app that can really help diabetics if we don't understand what it's like to be a diabetic?
Well, I really appreciate that you've been trying to empathize with what my experience is like.
So, I mean, is it okay if I show you the app now and kind of explain to you why I think it'll help you?
Yeah, of course. I'd love to see it.
So as we saw, not only does empathy make it easier to enter the world of potential customers, it gives us deep insight that simply cannot be obtained through secondary research. Think about this in your context. What are some of the ways you might be able to build empathy with your end users? All right, now let's shift to some of the tactical aspects for before and during the interview. Item number 1 should be to share your objective with the interviewee. You want to set context for why you are interviewing them and what you hope to get out of it. 2, create a discussion guide with 5 to 6 questions you believe will be necessary to meet your objective. 3, have a way that's comfortable for you to capture comments while still staying engaged in the conversation. Make sure that the comment capture isn't so consuming that it detracts from your connection with the person. And lastly, when using video interviewing best practices, be mindful. Now let's shift to some of the tactical aspects before and during the interview. Share your objectives with the interviewee. Give them a little insight into the context and what you hope to understand during the interview. Create a discussion guide with 5 to 6 questions you believe will be necessary to meet your objective. Have a way that's comfortable for you to capture comments while still staying engaged in the conversation. Make sure that the comment capture isn't so consuming that it detracts from your connection with the person. Many of us are having to use video interviews these days. In doing so, use video interviewing best practices. Be mindful of your audio and visual. Make sure you have clear audio, good lighting, and background noises, including typing, are kept in check. These details can be distracting if out of place, but are certainly manageable. Lastly, during the interview, we have a set of best practice recommendations. Again, feel free to screenshot this slide for future reference. First, explain the context briefly without leading them to any conclusions. You don't want to lead the witness or imply a preferred response. Guide, don't lead the conversation. You are there to learn from them. Let them talk you through answers to your questions. Stay engaged in the conversation while still capturing the information. Use cues that you would during normal conversation to let interviewees know you are listening. Using video or audio recording may impact responses you might get, so use them with discretion and always with permission. Ask about behaviors and reasons for behaviors. Often, it's most interesting to know what people did and why, not just their thoughts. Capture jobs, gains, and pains. Borrowing from the jobs to be done language, what is the person trying to accomplish? And what are the positives and negatives associated with that? And lastly, always thank your interviewee. Feedback and time are gifts they're sharing with you. Let's start by